today we're going to discuss about the risk assessment. So what is risk assessment and how we can conduct the risk assessments, all the things we will discuss about it today. Okay, so let's start our training. Risk assessment. Now, what is a risk assessment? Risk assessment is a systematic approach to identify hazards, evaluate the risk, incorporate appropriate measures to manage and mitigate risk for any work, process, or activity. That is a risk assessment. First of all, what you have to do, you have to identify the hazards, you have to evaluate the risk involved with that particular hazard. After that, incorporate appropriate measures to manage or mitigate those risks. So that is a risk assessment. Why we need to do a risk assessment? What is the reason for the risk assessment? First of all, we have to protect ourselves. Risk assessment is a key to prevention of accident. So risk assessment is a very important thing to avoid any accident. Everyone deserves to go home safely at the end of the day. Elevate safety awareness and ownership, aware of hazard, risk and controls and practicing safe science. University and faculty procedures, compliance with regulations. So that's why we need to conduct a risk assessment. Now, definition of hazard. As we know that hazard is anything which can cause harm, source of situation or act with the potential for harm in terms of human injury or ill health or a combination of these, that's called hazard. And we can say that hazard is something that can cause harm or injury. Now, the definition of risk. Risk is the combination of the likelihood of an occurrence of a hazardous event or exposures and the severity of injury or ill health that may be caused by the event or exposure. Likelihood that a hazard will cause a specific harm or injury to person or damage. Risk means the chance that someone will be harmed by the hazard. Risk equal to hazard effect plus probability, likelihood of occurrence. So if we say that what is a risk, we can say that risk is the combination of likelihood and the severity of that risk. Let's say that there is a risk of fire. Okay, there is a risk of fire. So we have to say that risk is the combination of likelihood. So that fire, how likely can occur? And if the fire will occur, what will be the severity from that fire? So that is a risk. It is the likelihood and the consequences. Severity. Now the risk concepts, what can go wrong, how likely is it, what are the impacts, and risk level. And after that, we have to manage the risk. Risk management also includes controls and monitoring of risk as well as communicating these risks. Risk management and the risk assessment is completely different. Risk assessment is the process where you will follow the 5 steps. Identify the identify the hazards, evaluate the risk. After then, you will control the risk, implement the control measure, review, and certain other points you will follow in that one. Risk management is involving control and monitoring of risk as well as communication also. That is under the risk management. Now, the legal requirement. Workplace Safety and Health Act. As per UK Health and Safety Act 1974, all the health and safety related concern in the work area that should be properly controlled, identified, and training should be provided. The Work and Safety Health Act is an essential part of the new OSS framework to cultivate good safety habits in all individuals at the workplace. It requires every person at the workplace to take reasonable, practicable steps to ensure the safety and health of every workplace and worker. So that is a legal requirement. Wherever you are working, whether you are working in any Middle East, if you are working in any Asian country, so I believe that there is a particular law regarding health and safety. There are some international law we have to follow, and there is some country-specific law which we have to follow regarding risk assessment. Now, legal requirement, reasonable, practicable action is considered to be practicable when it is capable of being done. Reasonably practicable. Reasonable practical usually takes into account the severity of harm and degree risk or likelihood of that injury or harm occurring. Greater risk, reasonable to go to every considerable expense and effort to reduce it. How much is known about the hazard and the ways of eliminating, reducing it to an or controlling it to an acceptable level? What are the others practicing and what are the standards recommended that we have to follow in legal requirement? Workplace safety and health, risk management, as I said, 1974 Work Act UK HSE. This is the legal requirement which we are following in most of the countries, and there are some other legal requirements which we have to follow country wise. Then we have to make sure that we are following those legal requirements and we are conducting a risk assessment and we are managing the risk inside any organizations. Now, Workplace Safety and Health Act Regulation 1974 penalties. Any person, there are certain penalties imposed by a government if they are not following the legal requirement. It is purely depend on the country to country. Somewhere it could be $10,000, somewhere it could be $100,000, somewhere it could be $50,000. It depends on the countries how they are managing the health and safety things inside the country. So risk, there are certain under the risk management, risk assessment, there are certain steps we have to follow conducting the risk assessment. We have to eliminate, we have to minimize and control risk, specific responsibilities, maintain risk assessment records, inform those at risk of risk and measures, safe work practices, and review of risk assessment. So these are the things we have to follow under the legal requirement. Now, risk management regulations. Why is there a need of risk management regulations? To hold stakeholders accountable for managing the risk they create to reduce risk at source. Now, what is a hazard? Means anything with the potential to cause harm, body injury. What is a risk? Risk is the combination of likelihood and the severity of that risk. So that is a risk. Now, risk control, how we can control the risk. As we know that we are following these steps, eliminate the risk, substitute, we can use the engineering controls, we can use the administrative controls also, we can use the PPE also, and we can use the safe work procedures also to control the risk. Now, records of risk assessment. What are the records we have to manage and how long you have to manage the risk assessment records? How often must the risk assessment must be reviewed? It is purely depend on how often you want to review your risk assessment. It's purely depend on your organization. But if there is any changes in your company, if there is an incident will happen, then you must review your risk assessment and you have to change that risk assessment also. If there is any legal requirement came, then you have to review your risk assessment. You have to change at frequent like time, maybe 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. You have to review your risk assessment. So these are the things you have to follow when you have to review your risk assessment. Now, offense. ESP who contravenes can result in penalty for first offense, a fine not exceeding $10,000, and for the second offense, a fine not exceeding $20,000 or jail term not exceeding 6 months. The people who's managing the health and safety in an organization, who has the whole and sole responsibility about the risk, about the health and safety inside inside organization, they have to be very what you call they have to be very they have to take care properly to make sure that they are managing the risk and health and safety inside organization. Otherwise, they have to pay the penalties or they have to go behind the bar. Risk assessment template. This is the risk assessment template which I am going to share with you. So this is the risk assessment template you can use in your organization. If you are not using, or if you are using your risk assessment template, that is also okay. But these are the basic information your risk assessment should contain. First of all, department, which department the risk assessment you are conducting. Then the location, which location you are conducting. Last review date, when did you last review? Name of the experiment, activity, what activity you are doing the risk assessment. Name of the person in charge. Name of person. Next review date, when you will going to review it next. First, hazard identification. First of all, serial number, what are the tasks you are conducting? In those tasks, what are the hazards are involved? Possible consequences, what are the consequences? Existing risk control, if there is any control is involving. Then you have to define the level of risk. SLR, safe, low, or risk. After that, additional risk control. If do you need additional risk control? If you need, okay. If you don't need, that is also okay. Then after additional risk control, what are the SLR? Action by, and what is the deadline? Who need to do the action, and what is the deadline of that one? Then conduct by, who conduct that risk assessment? After then, signature, date, and approved. Who's approved? Designation and name, signature and date. These are the things you have to follow in a risk assessment. Risk assessment process: identify the hazards, assess the risk and available control measures, manage the risk. Control the risk through implementation of appropriate control measures, monitor the controls and evaluate their effectiveness. And you have communication of risk and controls. These are the steps. Now, these are the risk assessment flow chart, how you have to conduct a risk assessment. First of all, you have to identify. What you have to identify? You have to identify the hazards. How you can identify the hazards? Selecting experiments, break down into successive tasks, potential hazards, potential harm, conditions, ill health conditions that you have to measure. After that, assess. Existing control measures, you have to check the existing control measure. If there is any existing control measure present for the particular hazards or not. You have to evaluate the risk. You have to evaluate the severity and the probability. After that, you have to manage the risk. You have to control the hazard, additional control measures, and review, and you have to approve also, and that should be communicated with the team also. Record keeping and document control. These are the records, you have to keep it, and you have to control the documents as well. Now, identify potential hazards. How you can identify the potential hazard? The most important step in risk assessment: hazards can be controlled if they are identified. If you are not identifying any hazard, you can't control. First of all, you have to identify. You can identify the hazard by the people, equipment, procedures, agents. Each step is analyzed for potential inherent hazards. Decision on the relevance of any particular hazard come later in the risk assessment process. Now, what are the hazards in a laboratory? In a laboratory, it could be chemical, radiation, fire, electrical, and biological, physical, slips and trips, falling hazards, ergonomics, thermal, noise, etc. And those could be acute and chronic. So this is one of the example which I'm giving for the laboratory. What are the hazards we can find inside a laboratory? In the same way, you have to identify the hazard in a particular area, particular task. If you are performing any task, what are the hazards are involved with that you have to identify. Now, identify potential harm. Identify what are the adverse conditions may arise due to the hazard present in your experiment, laboratory, or environment. Identify source of harm, how the harm can happen. Maybe it could come from the event or process. Maybe it could come from the hazardous substance like chemicals. Maybe it could come from the equipment. Identify who could be harmed. Who will harm? Maybe a researcher, other students, people, visitors. Identify how harm could occur. Accidentally, from height, fall from height, contact with corrosive chemicals. Injury, it could be post-aid treatment, visit clinic, hospital, admitted in hospital, permanent damage, acute or chronic effects. Property can be damaged also, and environmental release also can happen. So these are the risks. Now, risk evaluation. Consider existing controls. First of all, you have to consider the existing control. What are the engineering controls are available? Maybe the fume hood, glove box, chains for cylinder, others. This one of the example I'm giving you only for the laboratory. After that, administrative control. Maybe you have the signage, you have the training, you have the SOPs and others, and you have the personal protective equipment. Existing controls will not change the severity, but only likelihood they will change. Severity and likelihood is based on 3x3 matrix and their respective criteria is specified. Risk rating is the product of severity by likelihood. Refer to acceptability criteria on the recommended action for different risk rating. For medium and high risk, additional controls will be required. Now, the risk evaluation, how you can evaluate the risk, severity categories and descriptions. These are the severity categories and description which I am providing you. Level 1, 2, 3. Minor, moderate, and major. Human impact to physical being, no injury or height injury for the minor, requiring only first aid treatment. Biological impact, these are the biological impact, and environmental damage and property damage. What could be the property damage? So if it is this much, it will be minor. If it is this much, it could be moderate. It could be this much. Then it is a major. So in that way, you have to identify whether it is a minor, moderate, or major. Likelihood categories and descriptions: remote, possible, and frequent. Events frequency: undesired event which may occur but unlikely once in a 5 years. It is very low. Undesired event which is possible, probable once in a year. Maybe it is medium. It could happen. And undesired event which probably occur in most circumstances once or more in a 1 month. It is every month it is happening. Then it is a frequent. Now the risk evaluation. Risk matrix that we have to use to evaluate the risk. Likelihood and severity. Major, moderate, and minor. Remote, occasional, and frequent. So how you have to calculate? It is here. Remote 1, occasional 2, and frequent 3. So the minor is 1, moderate 2, and major 3. So what you have to do? You have to multiply 1 into 4, 4. If it is here, 1 into 6, 6. 1 into 9, 9. 2 2 is 4. 2 3 is 6. Okay, 3 2 is 6. 3 3 is 9. In that way, you have to multiply. So if it is coming 6, it is major. 6 and more than 6, it is major. 3 or more than 3, it is moderate. And below 3, 2, 1, 2, it is minor. So in that way, you have to evaluate the risk and you have to give the number. After that, risk evaluation, acceptability of risk, how you can accept. Risk score, if it is below 3, low risk, acceptable. You can say it is acceptable, no additional risk control measure required. To continue to monitor, ensure risk do not escalate or higher level. If it is 3 to 4, then medium risk, moderately acceptable. Then maybe you need some action or control to make sure that that is low. If it is high risk, then it is not acceptable. You can stop the work and you can do the control measures, put the control measures, and until the risk will not go down, then you should not start the work in that particular area or particular environment. Risk control, using hierarchy of controls to reduce the risk, using the concept of as low as reasonably practicable. Hierarchy of risk controls. First of all, eliminate or substitute. Engineering controls, you can use the ventilation hood. These are the most preferred one, these two. Administrative control, warning, lead work area, positioning, and PP. And these are the least preferred one. So you should always go for these one, the most preferable one. And these are the some controls which I am showing you: elimination, substitution, engineering, and administrative controls that we can use. Controls for PPE. So the elimination, sub out tasks to suitable party, chamfer sharp edges, removes spills, obstruction, purchase lower concern chemical. Okay, so these are the elimination. And the substitution also: replace noisy machines with a quiet machines, replace chemical X with a safer Y one, freon based, water based. So these are the control measures which we can use. And regarding the PPE also that we have, and education, enforcement, encouragement, and emergency preparedness. So these are the control measures which you can use for your risk assessment. Now the additional controls. What are the additional controls we require? Responsible person and timeline. Additional controls for the risk rated more than 3 or medium high risk. Reduce risk to as low as reasonably practicable. Who and when? Who should do that and when it should be done? Responsible person to implement the identified control measures and timeline for completion. Update the risk assessment upon completion of the additional control measures. Now the record keeping. Risk assessment record has to be kept minimum at least 3 years under work and health and safety management regulation requirement. Recommended to keep record as long as process activity is still valid, before and of any product life cycle, or to tie in with the period with other legislation requires. So you have to keep your record at least 3 years. Sorry, and if there is any law required. Implementation and review, how you can implement and when you should review. Management staff or principal investigator will need to improve the implementation of control processes. Monitor of the process and activity, you have to make sure that who going to implement these risk assessment and who going to review the risk assessment. Those things also you have to put. So thank you so much. That's all from my side regarding risk assessment. If you have any doubt regarding risk assessment, how to conduct the risk assessment, what are the template you have to use, how you can prepare the SOPs and processes regarding risk assessment, all your doubts you can clear with me. You can comment below, and if there is any query, I will definitely answer that query as well. So thank you so much for your time and patience. Please do not forget to subscribe my channel and like my videos, and please do share with your friends and colleagues. So thank you so much for your time. So let's see in the next video. Thank you.